the 15th, and this is Tracking the Tropics. From sunny Central Florida, I'm WESH 2 First Warning Meteorologist Eric Burris.
And from Savannah, Georgia, WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
All right, so Jeremy, you and I have been doing this now through hurricane season, but here we are in the middle of August, and hurricane season decided to enter the room, seemingly.
Yeah, we've had a lull here for a few weeks now. Last system we had was Hurricane Don, and then we had a couple little disturbances, but really lots of dusty, dry air over the main development region, and we're thinking that may start to ease up in the next probably week or so. And what's going on out there right now? Nothing too ominous. We do have some areas of interest, but they're way in the eastern Atlantic, and another wave about to move off from the west coast of Africa. So that's kind of what we're watching right now.
Yeah, so you talked about that dry Saharan dust, and this first wave has really succumbed to that dry Saharan dust. We're not seeing spin. We're really seeing some limited convection in there. So all intents and purposes, even the National Hurricane Center has noted that this is not looking more and more favorable for development. That said, I think, Jeremy, this wave rolling off the coast of Africa as we speak is probably the most rigorous tropical wave that we have seen come off that monsoonal flow from Africa. And the Hurricane Center has noted that wave does look like it's got a pretty decent opportunity for development.
Yeah, and a lot of the model data is also developing some sort of low in the next few days. I think if that one's going to develop, it might be kind of a quick development out there. So we may see tropical depression or maybe even something named before possibly the end of the week.
Yeah, and I think that the model data definitely backs that up. I wouldn't be surprised, and here's the percentages just for anyone that likes to play along. That front wave, Hurricane Center saying over the next 7 days a 10% likelihood of development. That back wave, Hurricane Center says a 30% chance of development. The model data definitely is showing that progression about 5 or 6 days out. But what I think that the Hurricane Center is doing in terms of these percentages is they're just kind of understanding that these monsoonal troughs, once they roll off Africa, they could look as beefy as can be. Then they hit the water and they kind of stumble around because they lost that fuel that they had. And I always say it's akin to like having to get its sea legs. It just needs a day or two to kind of stumble around, realize there's so much warm water to feed off of, and really take advantage of it. So I do think, Jeremy, by the end of this week, there will probably be something out there to watch. But even if it were to develop and move directly to you or directly to me, which we're not saying is going to happen, we're still way out from that to happen. And there's no immediate threats from these two systems.
Right. So we're in mid-August right now, and really we're thinking if anything's going to start getting closer to Gulf Coast, Florida, Southeast Coast, East Coast, it's a little bit later on in the month, and we'll get to some ensemble data here in just a moment. But they're, I think, pretty certain here that this lull is going to come to a crashing halt probably sooner than later.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if for no other reason, climatology states that we are starting to make that climb up the mountain, and these next 2 months essentially, really, that is the meat in the sandwich of the hurricane season. And the big factor, Jeremy, that we've been watching thus far has been all of that Saharan dust. And what you're looking at here in orange is an illustration of where that Saharan dust is over the Atlantic basin. And notice where the orange is, you don't see much in the way of clouds because all those dust particles just completely put the kibosh on any tropical development.
Yeah, and it's just been a lot of also kind of just that high to the north, sinking air in the Atlantic basin. So we're starting to, in the next probably 5 to 7 days or so, erode a little bit of that dust, that lead wave we talked about. Some of the showers, the thunderstorms, just the moisture in the atmosphere, cutting away at that southern end of the dust. And then as you play this forward here, you notice the later we get into this, the dust not entirely gone, but it is definitely eroding away.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And with that dust gone, now we start saying, all right, when we've got our tropical checklist of sorts, right? You put a check mark on the dust, you put a check mark on the atmospheric pressures because they kind of are starting to drop. You've got that record warm ocean temperature there. And so you end up with, frankly, among other things, much more favorable condition for tropical development, Jeremy.
Yeah, and so we've been talking about probably the last few times when we've had this lull, we've had all this kind of chatter outside that we're hearing about just warm water, how that could just spark the development of these tropical systems. And we were like, well, maybe just tap the brakes a little bit here because we have all this dusty, dry air. Several ingredients need to come into place to get tropical systems to form. Well, now that we take out sort of one of the negatives that's been preventing development, the dust, we still have obviously the warm water in place, and in some spots it's continued to warm maybe another degree or so over the last couple of weeks. So we're starting to just see some of the conditions start to come together to allow this tropical development. And definitely one thing each and every day we start off at work with a meeting. Weather starts it off, and I've been saying probably for the last at least 2 to 3 weeks, I said, hey, maybe the last 10 to 14 days of August, that's when we're going to start to see the activity ramp up, and this will probably continue all the way through mid-September.
And that was a part of our hurricane season forecast that we had illustrated back on March the 1st. We highlighted these kind of little sections of hurricane season, and now we're in the middle of August. In the next week or so, the models, Jeremy, are coming alive. And interestingly enough, not necessarily with those features that are out there in the open waters of the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm. And that was, if you go back and look, our forecast was issued March the 1st and definitely takes a little different approach to things. One that we kind of like and that's worked well for us. But yeah, that development could get a little closer to home, maybe very late August and into September.
Yeah, so let's do this. Let's jump into the nerd stuff. Let's get into the models and see what's doing. Give me 2 seconds here to get that reset. I was showing Jeremy something just before the broadcast. So, all right, this is a look at the raw GFS model, and what you're looking at here is normalized anomaly pressure. Okay, so in other words, where are the pressures a little lower than should be or a little higher than should be? And so right off the bat, kind of bottom right corner of your screen, you've got these features coming off the coast of Africa. This is Thursday, 2 a.m. of this week. All right, notice that area of orange in the center of your screen. That's the Bermuda High, kind of shifting around a little bit. And about Saturday now, that's 8 a.m. Saturday morning, you see that purple dot, kind of the bottom rightish corner of your screen. That is that second wave developing according to the GFS. Now, as the Bermuda High kind of lifts to the north and kind of shifts around a little bit, it gives you an opportunity to have this system kind of work over, at least according to the GFS right here, work toward Bermuda, weakening, but work toward Bermuda. Then another area of interest kind of develops out north of the Cabo Verde Islands. At the same time, though, and this is what's interesting, at this exact moment, when you've got these waves in the open waters of the Atlantic, do not forget that the Caribbean's water temperatures are running in the mid to upper 80s, and the GFS, boom goes the dynamite, tries to throw something together there. Now, again, this is one model, this is one run of one model, but the GFS has fairly consistently been saying, you know, this is around the 25th, 26th, 27th of the month. The GFS has been kind of consistently trying to develop something. It's not been consistent on where it goes, Jeremy, but we've seen that kind of development over model runs.
Yeah, and I would say the last probably 2 or 3 days, it's had some sort of kind of impressive feature towards the tail end of it. Not uncommon for the GFS to do that. However, this is starting to move into territory where we've already identified where we think some tropical development should be, and that would probably be Bahamas to the Carolinas and off the East Coast.
Right.
And there have been runs of the GFS here recently that do take it in that direction, and then it'll spin it back into the Gulf for a run. And it's far out right now, but if I had to place some bets down, I would say that it's probably a little bit to the west right now with that initial system. I would probably favor it a little more east.
Yep. So this is the part of our hurricane season forecast that we put out March the 1st, highlighting the Carolina, we call it, you know, the Carolina coast storm or what have you. that May and that July version, there were storms, Jeremy, that developed. They just were not full-blown tropical in nature, correct?
Yeah, and it was not just one low, but probably like two or three that we kind of had an eye on for this time window. And we have there the 21st, the 29th, really anytime late August, we're looking for some sort of development, a possibility. And we'll start to see if more models, once they come into range here, I think the GFS, what you were showing, is that around like 300 hours or so?
Yeah, 276 now. But
Okay.
that's like that image is August 26th. But Jeremy, I really do want to show the ensembles because the operational, the deterministic, the GFS that you're looking at, that's only one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right.
So do you want to explain the ensembles and then we can get into the details of it?
All right, so the model just runs several different times, and I think what Eric will bring up here is you're going to start to see little circles probably all over the map. So the different models that are running off from the GFS here, there.
Yeah.
To me, we've gone 2 or 3 weeks here where we've been showing this, and there's been almost nothing, and then all of a sudden now we get into this period where tropical development is more favored, and look at all these different runs that are trying to put these low pressure areas out and potentially some tropical systems.
Well, and the interesting thing to me as well, notice the operational had something forming and going like right up Florida's west coast. Most of the activity on the ensembles are on the east side of Florida, kind of working up into that Carolina time frame, or kind of starting that recurvature motion. So again, it looks like to me that the model's trying to sniff out what would end up being like that Bahamas, Carolina part of the pattern. But the ensembles, I love the ensembles because it gives you a chance, and here's like a better way to look at it. It's just the GFS run 50 different ways, essentially. And what we do, the reason that it looks so chaotic is because you're putting all of those 50 on top of each other here. And so when you start to see the ensembles spreading, that gives you an idea the confidence is low. When you see the ensembles tightly packed, that gives you an idea that the ensemble confidence is high. So for right now, more of the ensembles are east of Florida than west, which is opposite of the operational. So to me, Jeremy, it's still just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and it'll probably take another week before we start to see something might gel up a little bit, and you start to get a little more well-defined path with that. But that's the GFS. You have the European model available.
Absolutely. And what is so interesting about the European is that the European model has been a little different consistently with this. So let's take a look. All right, this is the European model, and watch how it's really trying to figure out if there will be something approaching the southeast coast from the main development region, whereas the GFS is kind of home growing something from the Caribbean and lifting it to the north. So the European is showing a bunch of things coming in from like the Atlantic, whereas the GFS ensemble is more bubbling it up much closer to home. At this point, Jeremy, if I'm honest, I would say that the GFS seems to have the better atmospheric dynamic here, just because to get something from the MDR, the main development region, to come all the way to that kind of a path, to me, would be a little more difficult unless it stays super, super, super weak.
Yeah, and this might be one of potentially maybe a couple things that develop Bahamas, maybe Eastern Gulf off the southeast coast as we go to very late August and then maybe the first week or so of September.
Right. Now, we've not done this on our Tracking the Tropics broadcast, but I really would like to do it. I showed Jeremy this before we got on here. Jeremy, can we do a little BSR action? Can we do a little bit of that?
Yeah. We haven't talked about this a whole lot, but I mean, we use everything and anything to help us forecasting. And this is something that I started using probably over 10 years ago. And it's kind of like a backup to the main method we use with our cycling weather pattern and picking things out. In the shorter term, maybe looking out, say like 2.5, 3 weeks or so, we look out into the Pacific, a sort of a specific part of the Pacific, and we've determined that it takes some of those features, maybe like 2.5 weeks or so, to reach us here along the southeast coast. So we kind of keep an eye out in the Pacific at the surface, the upper airflow, and then we have this little hypothetical U.S. that we kind of overlay it. So sounds crazy, but again, we have used this method, and basically we're just using it as maybe a second or third tier for a little longer range forecasting to kind of back up some of the things we're already discussed and talked about. We're like, oh, hey, this thing also is pointing in that direction, so you can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, so it's like a teleconnection, and there are known teleconnections around the world. When the weather does this there, give it a little bit of time, and that fluid dynamic will happen here. And I love that you had mentioned too that like we try to use every conventional and non-conventional tool in our tool chest that has shown promise. And because at the end of the day, and this, I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for me 100% here. But to me, at the end of the day, weather is not in its perfection. It's not an exact science, because as much as we know, there's plenty that we don't know. So I'm all about trying new things to see if we can discover them. And I'm grateful that you have brought me along on that journey.
All right, so let people know kind of the time frame you're looking at here, and then sort of maybe how it pairs up with some of the ideas we've talked about for months now.
Absolutely. So first thing, Jeremy had mentioned that there were several lows in this pattern that kind of hung around the Carolinas. And so what you're looking at here, notice there's a couple of lows around the Carolinas. Now that is an image from the Pacific, excuse me, on August 11th, okay? And so the general rule in terms of timing is it's about 2.5 weeks, like 2 weeks, 3 days, plus or minus. Again, it's not perfect, but based on that, if that's August 11th, that would be about the 28th of August around the Carolinas, which lines up to what the model data is kind of saying for a timeline, and which lines up with our hurricane season forecast. Okay, so we've got that. It's kind of triple checking our work, right?
I think so, yes.
Okay, what's interesting as well, so you've got those lows. Then, and I mean, like, look at that. Like, that is a decent low around the Carolinas, and that, again, that's around the 28th of August. But after that, what's so interesting, let's just keep going through time and watch this right there. Look at the Gulf of Mexico. Decent low. That low goes right toward kind of the Big Bend of Florida there. Okay, that is August 14th. That happened yesterday in the Pacific, but using our teleconnection method, August 14th translates to about August 31st, September 1st, okay? Okay. West coast of Florida, all right? Are you ready? Are you ready for this, Jeremy? Because this is where, like, my mind melts, okay?
Right.
Right around August 31st, September 1st, that low in the Big Bend. Look at the part of the forecast pattern Jeremy and I authored March the 1st. Florida West Coast storm, August 30th through September 5th, the pattern favors that. There's that. I'm not hoping for a storm. I'm not wishing for a storm. All I'm saying is that we know the pattern should support it. Now the BSR teleconnection is kind of giving us a hint that there may be something there. So right off the bat, we're watching the Carolina and West Coast part of the pattern using two completely unrelated methods of looking down the line, right?
Right. And then that's not even talking about once we get kind of past that, say, Labor Day time frame, maybe another week or 10 days past that, then we're into getting closer to mid-September. And of course, then that would start to highlight Bahamas, maybe east coast of Florida, towards the southeast coastline. So I think we have several opportunities while the coastline has been very quiet so far this season. I think late August through early to mid-September, that is really the time frame that I think our coastal areas need to be on guard.
For sure. We've been talking about this for weeks. Obviously, those of us that live in Hurricane Alley know every year we kind of hit that moment where we realize like, oh, now it's time. And I think that for me, this is that moment, recognizing, oh, all right, now the tropics are ready. Now the tropics are starting their thing. So this is where, and again, I would never say that this is hype. This is just strictly saying, hey, you got two weather nerds using every tool in the tool chest, saying that things are about to start getting busy. And the one other element too, Jeremy, is that in addition to all of that, like the water temperatures are just boiling across, take out the main development region just for a moment, because say, for example, all of this ends up being homegrown stuff. Like, the Caribbean waters, 90 degrees, and then that Gulf feature, you're talking about water temperatures hovering around 89, 90 degrees, right?
Yeah, and even off the southeast coast now. Okay, so I just pulled up the water temperatures along the southeast coast, which are water temps here usually peak somewhere in the mid 80s usually. I've seen it as warm as probably 88 degrees, and our water temperature as of right now, 10 a.m., by Tybee Island is now 88 degrees. I think that's the warmest I've ever seen it. Maybe one time I've seen it hit 89, but I think 88 is probably the warmest I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
So we are looking at, I'm not going to say it's a record because there's probably a time that it maybe hit 90 degrees, and I'll look into that today. But we're about maxed out as some of the warmest temperatures we've seen for our nearshore waters.
Yeah. So now that we're starting to put things together, for me personally, we knew that there was going to be that moment. I think we're getting into go time, and looking at the patterns, your communities, my communities, we're going to have to be very, very vigilant watching, because among other things, and I don't know why we didn't even mention this a few seconds ago, but the recycle of this Florida West Coast storm, every single time a storm system moved through in May and July, when they were not tropical in nature per se, they were still storm systems. Jeremy, once they crossed Florida, where did they go?
Yeah, they were off the southeast coast, and then we had the one move from across Florida, and then eventually we debated this again. That was into the Memorial Day weekend. So yeah, that one was not tropical in nature, but it definitely had some tropical storm force winds.
Well, right, and your area got hammered pretty good with that. We remember the Carnival cruise ship went into that storm. I mean, there's a lot there. So watching this kind of recycling around again, these next few weeks are going to get busy. But for me, while we're watching these two waves out in the Atlantic, we need to be watching the Caribbean and the Gulf, I think, probably more closely in the southeastern United States.
Right. Yeah. And it's a lot of people think, oh, hurricane season, we get to watch these things come across the Atlantic. You have a week, 10 days to prepare, something like that. But if you start getting a system in the Northern Caribbean, near Cuba or the Bahamas, that all of a sudden starts developing and you're not paying attention, that could be something pretty strong within 2 to 3 days. Not saying that happens. And again, this Carolina part of the pattern, obviously we have Carolina in the name, but this window has definitely favored kind of east of Florida, east of the southeast coast.
Yeah.
Not to say if something developed, there couldn't be impacts, but that part of the pattern had a lot of lows that were kind of just paralleling the coast.
Right. And then another thing that I'm just looking at while you were chatting, it looks like we're going into MJO phase for next week as well, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and then if you get these systems forming, then there's other things more like indirectly. You start looking at moon phases, because you're going to have threats of like coastal flooding, things like that. But that's getting really far down the road. So right now we're just kind of we're in monitoring right now. Yeah. And a lot of times you get tropical systems, and as long as they stay away from the coast, they really don't do much.
Right, which is great.
And sensible weather.
I think that these waves that we're watching way out there in the Atlantic are probably going to be those types of systems where they'll do their thing. One may not develop, one may develop, but some models are trying to develop like back to back to back to back waves out there, and most of those should recurve. But to your point, it's those homegrown systems that kind of bubble up out of nowhere and develop and get you without much warning. I think those are going to be the ones that we really have to watch. And as Mickey over on YouTube points out, hot water, MJO, lack of dust, the ingredients are starting to come together. And I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I know you pulled up the GFS and also the European model.
Yeah.
Can you bring up, by chance, the operational of, I know you don't ever really look at this. I look at all of them. I'm not a big ensemble person. You're kind of the guy to go to for that. But the Canadian model, go to the 240 hour, just because.
Operational Canadian 240.
If you can do more like the surface setup or something like that, and I don't know how wide of a view,
but 240.
It has just an entire train of systems across the main development region.
Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4.
It looks like it has 4. At least 4, and then almost another wave about to depart Africa. So
just look at the fluid motion of this. I'm going backwards, obviously, but like watch going forward.
And again, that ends at late on the 24th of August, but I think it just reinforces, I'm not saying this is going to be right, but there are models out there, and we're going to see which ones are really doing well with this type of setup and not. And not all models are obviously that active, but I just wanted to show that one. That one's kind of like a hyperactive one. Yeah. And then we have others that maybe are just kind of hinting at one or two systems. So there's really a lot to digest here as we go through the back half of August.
Yeah, Shauna says, "Oh, look at that train!" Right, like you can definitely tell that models are trying to sniff it out, and because the models are so different in their prognostication, it gives you an idea that the mathematics of each are just trying to feel it out and figure it out. But at the end of the day, they all agree on one thing, which is that this nice snooze fest that we've enjoyed for a little while is starting to come to an end. And Jeremy, before we go back to you real fast, questions, folks, ask your questions. We've still got some time. So yeah, Jeremy, models are starting to wake up. It's like the calm before the storms, I feel like.
Yeah, a little bit. I kind of liked it, at least for our jobs, when there was really nothing out there. I mean, we could spend 10 seconds on the tropics and kind of what we've been doing, but I did make some graphics here recently. We've been showing on air. And we're just saying, hey, the lull, it was probably going to continue through mid-August. And then it's really the last 10 to maybe 14 days of the month that we're going to start to pick up the activity. So probably the first thing that if we're going to see a depression, tropical storm would be that disturbance leaving the west coast to Africa. Yeah. And then maybe farther down the road, something that's a little closer into the Caribbean, Western Atlantic, maybe Eastern Gulf.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's going to be that one that kind of is the one that could give a little more trouble, perhaps. All right, Jeremy, question. Janet is asking, I don't think I've ever heard of the MJO before. And I just kind of had mentioned it, but I wasn't even thinking like, oh, yeah, like we should explain it. So do you want to explain what the Madden-Julian oscillation is?
I'll let you, because you were good on your teleconnections earlier.
Yeah. Okay, so think about it like this. Essentially, this is going to be an oversimplification, but this should get the trick, okay? The Madden-Julian oscillation is this idea that there's this extra little bit of spin in the atmosphere, this extra little bit of energy, and it just kind of works around the globe. And there are what we call different phases of the MJO. And when it's in phase in the Pacific, you start to get storms developing because there's that added little spin, a little help in the atmosphere. And that's where it has been, and we know this because we've had tropical systems aplenty over in the Pacific Basin. But looking to this weekend and next week, that phase shifts a little more toward our basin, the Caribbean, the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where I think we're going to be able to get that added help of developing tropical systems. How'd I do, Jeremy?
I think you did great. But yeah, I mean, it's all, again, we showed you some different things we look at. MJO can play a role into all of this, and then when you get all those ingredients are into phase and everything comes together, you generally get some of the busiest parts of the hurricane season. And it looks like that's what we're headed into, and it could last probably close to a month.
Yeah. Cindy says Labor Day weekend could be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any vacations coming up that you were trying to take? Were you hanging around for Labor Day?
Listen, I'm hanging. Well, the joke in my weather department is that they know when storms are going to threaten before you and I pen publicly our hurricane forecast, because I put all my summer vacation in when there will not be storm activity. So no, I do not have, my next vacation is in October. Granted, that's kind of our kryptonite time, but it's in October, so hopefully I'll be okay.
Yeah, and yeah, as you mentioned, once we get into October, definitely we're not at that point making our forecast like months in advance. We're kind of starting to study the new pattern setting up October, November.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if you have this graphic. If you don't, no worries. But we did see, and I think we need to talk about this a little bit, the updated hurricane season forecasts.
Yes.
That came out within the last week. I think that was last Thursday. We got an update from the National Hurricane Center. In the last couple of weeks, Colorado State updated their numbers, and then our numbers have not changed at all. But if you want to kind of go over the graphic you have there.
Okay, so this is the August update. I believe this is the latest numbers. Jeremy, double check me.
So Colorado State is up to 18.
Hi, Gavolt. Did I miss that?
But I don't know. I don't. That's for named storms or total storms for the season.
Okay, I'll have to.
But we can at least go over the NOAA one. That's correct there. They went from 12 to 17 to 14 to 21.
Okay, yeah. So they upped their numbers. And being in such a quiet stretch, what I think is so interesting is the fact that they went ahead and continued to up the numbers, which really says that they're thinking September, the end of August, September, and probably the beginning of October are going to be very, very busy.
Yeah. So if we're at 5 storms for the season so far, I mean, 9 more would be average, which that's a lot of storms yet to form. Definitely could happen.
Is this
Is
that the latest
21,
one there?
What was that?
Is that the latest one? I was out for a little while, so I haven't updated. I think this has the old NOAA numbers.
Yeah, so that is the old ones, but now remember on your other graphic you had it, so it's 14 to 21 named storms, and then they upped the number of hurricanes.
All right, hold on. Let me fix this on the fly, of course. 14 to 21, stand by. I'm going to be very unprofessional here.
We've only had 1 hurricane so far, so if by chance we were going to get to 11 hurricanes this season, I mean, we would need 10 more. That's wild. That's some heavy lifting, considering coming up in a couple of weeks will be this September.
Okay, I think that this is, how's that?
That's good. The hurricanes and major hurricanes, so I think that's looking right now.
Yep.
So Colorado State's at 18. They started the season at 13, I believe. And then NOAA was 12 to 17. They're now up to 14 to 21. We've been consistent 14 to 18. No plans to change that.
Yeah, once we put our forecast out in March, we don't touch it. It's done. So, I even still, I mean, to get to 9 hurricanes to me would be quite impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely could see maybe in the next month you get a few more. We'll have to see how things play out. To get to those higher numbers, you'd almost need something in the open waters of the Atlantic, maybe Bermuda points north again, something to sneak up there and really kind of just bomb out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a lot to still have ahead. If you were to get to that top end, obviously the bottom end, the 14, that's an average season in terms of named storms. Mm-hmm. And of course, we clearly think we'll get there. That's our bottom number, and then our top number is up to 18.
Yeah, and I think our range is great. I'm very comfortable with our range, and I have been since we put it out in March. One thing, and this is how you can tell that we are training the viewers on how our methodology works in our forecasting. Beverly points out if we have an active hurricane season in October, that means a very active season next year.
I mean, it's potential. We do look at some other factors, but that is definitely a key ingredient. If you're busy in October and November, a lot of those features are going to cycle back, and
Yep.
then we just kind of we put our own twist on it, what we think they might look like within the hurricane season. But one thing, initially in April and May, all these hurricane season forecasts that we don't put out were being issued, and at that point, I felt like we were a bit of the outlier.
Oh, yeah.
And now everything like these two, AccuWeather, the Weather Channel, all of them have issued their own forecast for
Right.
the season, preseason, and then now. And the only one that has not changed, and maybe I'm wrong, but is the one that we issued.
And I'm darn proud of that fact, may I just
Yeah.
add.
And hey, ours maybe we only get 2-3 more systems, and
Yeah.
that wraps it up for the season. That'd be great, but I think there's still kind of this busy period ahead, and then maybe whatever happens in October.
At the end of the day, if we're wrong, I'm okay with it. If it's quieter, right? Like
Right.
nobody's going to complain about that. And I just want to make sure everybody knows, like, we're not over here cheering for storms.
No.
But I'm very comfortable looking at the data, looking at the science, that we are where we are in terms of our forecast.
Yeah, and next time we talk, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, we should have a much better idea of how things are looking. We'll know if that wave about to depart Africa develops into something,
Right.
and that's kind of a good test too, because the models are kind of hinting at development with it.
Right.
And if it goes off and just doesn't develop, then the struggle to get these systems to form continues, and then that might be like, there's something.
Yeah, there's something
bigger
else
at
going
play,
on.
or maybe it is just going to be a little quieter season, and then only the real favored parts of the pattern we see some development, and then the rest of it is maybe just some noise out there.
And noise that doesn't impact people, I'm fine with. So for right now, we've got these two areas to watch, but watch the Gulf, watch the Caribbean, because to me, that's where we're going to be watching, particularly into next week. You have anything else to add, sir?
No, I think we do this once a week, but obviously we're both on social media and do our Facebook Lives often, so people can get the updates in between now and then.
Yep.
And if they could just take a moment, this is always greatly appreciated, because we have our audiences in Florida, the Gulf Coast, Southeast, East Coast, kind of expanding here. If they can just share our updates, and hopefully we'll get more people joining us during what we think will be a busy part of the season, and we can kind of help talk and guide people through what's coming here in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, and whether a system impacts Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, the Bay of Campeche, we're going to be tracking it. So that's the bottom line. All right, my friend, we will talk soon. In the meantime, from sunny Central Florida, I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
Let's watch the tropics. Take care, y'all.